Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the space where we say, I can sleep. I hope the first week of June has been treating you guys well and that the weather has not been as bipolar as it has been for me. We had a very hot weekend last week, but this entire week so far for me has been oddly cool and a bit rainy, which is very odd for summer. But I'm not complaining because I would prefer that over the summer heat. Otherwise, I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves as always. And also, as always, if you are enjoying these readings and would like for me to continue doing these readings, you can show your support by leaving me some likes, leaving me some comments, sharing my stuff, and following me on my platforms like Spotify at iKenSleep, YouTube at iKenWin, TikTok at iKenWin, and Instagram at officially.iKenWin. Let us ascend into heaven official's blessing. Chapter 17, Paradise to Ashes, the Second Coming of Fangxin. Lian didn't expect Shi Qingxuan to suddenly light a fire, and he didn't even have time to stop him before it was too late. The flames were exceedingly bright and revealed the silhouette of a black-clad man. The man in black had his head hung low against the stone wall at the end of the path. His face was white as a sheet, his black hair a mess. But underneath that unkempt appearance was an expression that shone with determination and a gaze like burning ice. Although he sat cross-legged without a trace of discomfort, the stench of blood was thick in the air. He was clearly gravely wounded and was obviously imprisoned here. His "I have nothing to say" was probably him mistaking them for interrogators. Shi Qingxuan saw his face and cried, "It's you!" That man didn't seem to expect guests and was taken aback. He looked as though he wanted to say, "It's you," as well. But alas, he held back. Lian calmed Roye, who was ready to attack. "So you two know each other?" After crossing so many hurdles and finally finding someone, Shi Qingxuan looked relieved. He was about to respond when the man cut in. He said in a tone that left no room for dispute, "No." Shi Qingxuan raged at those words and pointed at him with his fan. "Is it so shameful to know me? What hurtful words, Mingxiang? I'm your best friend." The man denied it resolutely. "I have no friends who would run around in that sort of attire." Shi Qingxuan was still in his tattered purple silk dress. Truly, a shameful sight. Lian wanted to laugh at the thought that there were really people in this world who would claim to be someone's best friend to validate themselves. It was definitely Shi Qingxuan's style. But Mingxiang? If he remembered the 5 elemental masters correctly, the Earth Master's name was Ming Yi. Lian spoke up. "Are you perhaps the Lord Earth Master?" "It's him. You've met before," Shi Qingxuan replied. Lian looked Ming Ying over and wondered. "Have we?" He didn't recall ever meeting such a character. "You have," Shi Qingxuan confirmed. "We have not," Ming Yi asserted. "Yes, you have," Shi Qingxuan said exasperatedly. "Before, at Banyue Pass. You guys didn't forget that fast, did you?" Seeing Ming Yi's face go from ghastly pale to ashen grim, Lian finally remembered. When they first met at Banyue Pass, wasn't there a black-clad lady with Shi Qingxuan? Hua Cheng had told him at the time that the black-clad person wasn't the Water Master, but was surely one of the 5 elemental masters. As expected, Shi Qingxuan was not only passionate about transforming into his own female form, he was also passionate about dragging others into doing the same. No wonder the black-clad lady looked extremely pissed off at the time, like she was disgusted. Recalling how Shi Qingxuan tried to wheedle him into joining the fun, Lian realized that it truly been a close call and was glad he didn't give in. "Lord Earthmaster, are you the one who sent forth the ascending fire dragon?" Lian asked. I was, Ming Yi answered. They had found the right person. Lian nodded and said, Lord Earthmaster is probably seriously wounded. We'd best make our escape now and talk later. Without any prompting, Shi Qingxuan knelt down and lifted Ming Yi onto his back. Then let's get out of here. The three retracted their steps, and Shi Qingxuan talked as he walked. I have to ask, Mingxiang, aren't you good at fighting? You were perfectly fine back at Banyue Pass, so how did you get beaten up this bad in a matter of days? How did you piss off that Crimson Rain Softflower? There was a bit of schadenfreude in his tone. Lian mentally noted. He's speaking as though he isn't afraid of being punched. They are good friends indeed. Ming Yi looked like he'd had enough of listening to Shi Qingxuan talk, and he spat. Shut up! But this was also a question Lian wanted the answer to, so he adjusted his wording. Lord Windmaster, why would Hua Cheng give you trouble? Ming Yi didn't tell him to shut up, but he didn't answer either. Lian turned his head to look at him, and saw he had his eyes closed. After days of imprisonment and interrogation, and being so badly wounded, Ming Yi must have felt so relieved by their sudden rescue that he could finally relax. His questions weren't urgent anyway, so Lian didn't try to wake him. The three ran up the stairs, and Lian fished out his dice and rolled once more. He didn't know what number he rolled out in the dark, only that before them, he heard a soft clack. A crack peeked open and light seeped through. Lian pushed at the door and was just wondering whether he'd have the chance to take Lang Ying away too, when unexpectedly, the first step he took was hollow. The moment he felt himself fall forward, he cried, Don't come out! Lian somersaulted through the air and fell on something hard. He felt brief relief that it wasn't a bladed mountain or a sea of fire that he'd fallen into, until he looked up and realized that a bladed mountain or a sea of fire might have been better. Hua Cheng's exceptionally handsome face was only inches away from his brows raised high, and his gaze locked on him. When the stone door opened this time, it dumped him directly on top of Hua Cheng. He'd fallen into the armory. At the moment, Hua Cheng was sitting on the grand chair of the armory, supposedly wiping the scimitar at Ming. Even when someone suddenly fell into his lap from above, he'd only moved his hands away and stopped cleaning without any air of surprise. He gazed calmly at Lian, as if waiting for an explanation. Of course, Lian had none, and could only lie in his lap and stare back boldly. Suddenly, he saw another person at the periphery of his vision, and when he turned to look, he saw it was Lang Ying. That bandaged boy was sitting on the floor looking terrified. In fact, his hands were clutching his head while he stared at the two of them. Why was Lang Ying here too? It looked like Hua Cheng was interrogating him? But when Lian peered upwards, he saw half of Shi Qingxuan's white boots stepping over the void. There wasn't time to think, and Lian quickly gripped Hua Cheng's shoulders. I'm sorry, Lian cried, then tackled Hua Cheng. This tackle shoved Hua Cheng a few meters away, and he even tumbled a couple times before he found his footing. By then, Shi Qingxuan, with Ming Yi still on his back, had already jumped and landed with ease in the same spot Hua Cheng had just been sitting. Lian forced himself to look back, and Hua Cheng was still looking at him without a word, but that one quirked brow was now arched even higher. Lian leapt to his feet and backed off a few feet, apologizing as he did so. I'm sorry. Lang Ying stared at Hua Cheng, seeming extremely frightened, and rushed toward Lian to hide behind him. Lian shielded him and said, Sanlang, allow me to explain. I'm waiting, Hua Cheng responded. Wait, shouldn't it be the opposite? Shi Qingxuan spoke up. He should be the one who owes you an explanation. He's the one responsible for the missing heavenly official. Be wary, Your Highness. This was exactly the situation Lian didn't want to face. He looked at Hua Cheng intently. Sunlung, I don't know what misunderstanding occurred between you and Lord Earthmaster, but why don't we talk this out peacefully? The best case scenario would be Hua Cheng letting them go without harm. Although the Earthmaster was wounded, his life was not in danger, and he wasn't missing any limbs. If he dropped the matter, this wouldn't need to escalate. If Hua Cheng let them leave, then when they reported back to the heavens, Lian would do anything to beg Junwu for mercy, heedless of his own honor. Unexpectedly, however, Hua Cheng asked, Earthmaster? What Earthmaster? After a pause, he continued, Oh, did you mean the one on Windmaster's back? He's nothing more than an inept subordinate of mine. Both Lian and Shi Qingxuan were taken aback at this. He's obviously one of the heavenly officials. How dare you say that otherwise? Shi Qingxuan objected. Hua Cheng laughed. Then I wonder why your honorable heavenly official would conceal his identity, leave behind his respectable title, and come work as an officer under me. Hua Cheng drew out his scimitar in a silvery crescent moon flash that followed Emming's curve. If that is genuinely the Earthmaster, then what commendable patience to put on an act for 10 years. In the past decade, I had thought him suspicious from time to time, but there was never any proof. If I hadn't spotted him traveling alongside the Windmaster in Banyue, I'd still be in doubt. In a split second, Lian understood everything. So that was what happened. As it turned out, the reason the Earthmaster had gone missing and been in prison was ultimately because he had gone undercover and concealed his true identity for a decade to serve as a ghost officer under Hua Cheng. To be blunt, he was a spy. Once in a while, Hua Cheng would think the subordinate's actions were suspect, but without concrete evidence, he just kept him under observation. And it was only recently that Hua Cheng uncovered the Earthmaster's deception. During their journey to Banyue Pass, Hua Cheng had seen the Earthmaster next to the Windmaster. Even disguised as a woman, with thanks to the Windmaster, Hua Cheng still saw through that fake skin. He discovered the black-clad lady was the ghost officer he suspected and locked on to his identity as one of the 5 elemental masters. After the Banyue case was over, Hua Cheng probably left Puchi Shrine to settle his score with the Earthmaster. It may have been during that deadly pursuit and dire circumstances that Ming Yi set off the distress signal. Then, Junwu summoned Lian and gave him the mission to launch this rescue. That a heavenly official failed to mind his duties and instead went undercover in the Ghost Realm for over a decade was quite the scandal. Never mind the politics behind it. If Ming Yi was to remain imprisoned and tortured, all heaven would break loose if he actually died at Hua Cheng's hands. The world would be gripped by absolute chaos. If that day came, no one would be spared. After thinking all this through, Lian could only say, I understand that the fault is ours, but Sunlun, I still hope you will let us go this time around. Hua Cheng watched him intently. Then after a moment, he said quietly, Your Highness, some things are best not to get involved in over much. Suddenly, Shi Qingxuan cried from the side, Wind, come to me! The moment the fan came out, wild gusts started blowing through the armory. The weapons on the walls and shelves began to rattle, humming and moaning. Lord Windmaster, we haven't done anything yet. Lian was bewildered. I don't think either of you are going to make a move first, Shi Qingxuan said. So I'll be the bad guy. Wind, come to me! There was an enormous cracking sound, and Lian could feel clumps of dust falling from above his head. He looked up and saw that one side of the roof was being raised by the gusts, breaking at the seams and forming a large fissure. The armory had no windows or other visible exits. Shi Qingxuan's intention was not to fight, but rather to escape through a crack in the roof. Within the crazed gale, Hua Cheng's raven-black hair and maple-red clothes whipped wildly, but the man himself remained utterly unmoved. He smirked. "You have a fan, and coincidentally, so do I." Hua Cheng retrieved a fan from one of the armory shelves. It was small and intricate, its spine and leaf made of pure gold, serene and beautiful. Hua Cheng twirled it in his hand, then snapped it open. He grinned wordlessly, elegance suffusing his murderous aura. He flipped his hand and fan, and a strong gust shot toward them with a blinding silver flash. The three dodged and heard behind them the sound of hail-like darts battering the walls and ground. When they turned their heads to look, row upon row of long strips of golden foil were nailed into the ground. Each piece was thin but deeply embedded, its sharpness and viciousness clear. Every weapon inside this armory was a spiritual one, and anyone he grabbed at random possessed equally murderous power. Hua Cheng flipped his hand again, and another golden foiled gust blew. The winds called forth by Shi Qingxuan were strong, but the stronger they were, the more dangerous the situation became. The armory was only a hall, and its space were limited. The winds raised by the windmaster's fan would rebound around the interior and blow the golden foil whirling around them, dancing in this madness. Lian was afraid the golden foil would harm them, so he shielded Lang Ying and cried, "Lord Windmaster, please stop for now!" The golden foil whirled closely around Shi Qingxuan and Min Yi. Shi Qingxuan wanted to stop as well, but the roof had been raised by his winds, revealing a crack. If he stopped now, all his efforts would go to waste. Just then, the golden sheets encircling them suddenly flew upward all at once. There was a cacophony of clinking and clinking. Then a person broke through the roof and leapt down, accompanied by showers of debris and dust. The moment he landed, that person shouted, "Lord Windmaster, I apologize, but I just couldn't sit still any longer." Shi Qingxuan was overjoyed. "Qin Qiu, you've come just in the nick of time." The young man carried a great sword, its blade as wide as a grown man's palm. It was indeed Lang Qin Qiu. His great sword was shimmering gold, but at a closer look, it wasn't because his sword was golden, but because it had sucked up all the golden foil. They overlapped and covered the entirety of the blade, making it look as if it was a massive sword forged of gold. Lang Qin Qiu's greatsword was forged from a curious metal born of a lodestone mountain, and it had the amazing ability to magnetize and attract metal. As long as the opposing spiritual weapon did not exceed a certain level of spiritual power, once he gripped the hilt, he could mentally incite its ability and pull in all surrounding metals, absorbing them into his blade. Sure enough, soon the layer of gold foil was sucked into the sword, the gold disappearing completely. At this sight, Hua Cheng laughed out loud, closed his fan, and tossed it away behind him. Are the heavenly officials so pathetically poor that once they see gold, they can't let it go? If those words were directed at Lian, he would have pretended not to hear them. But they were directed at Lang Qin Qiu, a noble born of royalty. He hadn't cared for riches his entire life, and although he knew the enemy was intentionally taunting him, he was still provoked into a boiling rage. He raised his sword with both his hands and lunged at Hua Cheng. Hua Cheng drew his scimitar with one hand, twirling silver shimmers in the air, and calmly prepared to face the attack head-on. Lang Qin Qiu's strike used all of his power. He was like a newborn bull unafraid of a tiger, but Lian could already see the difference in their ability. If this strike landed, it would mean certain death. On the sidelines, even Shi Qingxuan, who couldn't deduce any such difference, watched with jittery alarm. He yelled, "Qin Qiu, don't!" But at such a precarious moment, how could a mere shout stop the arrow that was knocked and ready to shoot? Unexpectedly, just when the scimitar and sword were about to clash, a blinding white light exploded within the armory. It was a light so immense it enveloped the entirety of the armory, and everyone temporarily lost their sight. All they could see was glaring white. Lian, however, was prepared and could see with some difficulty. He gathered all the powers he borrowed from Shi Qingxuan in his right hand and transformed the energy to a giant flame before shooting it. A corner of the armory was immediately ablaze. Soon after, Lian released Rouye and tied himself, Shi Qingxuan, Ming Yi, Lang Qinqiu, and Lang Ying together. He shouted, "Lord Windmaster, blow us upwards!" Even though Shi Qingxuan couldn't open his eyes, he still followed Lian's directions. He raised his fan and snapped downwards. A violent twister formed on the flat ground, blowing toward the ceiling, and at last broke through the crumbling roof. Rouye had the 5 of them tied in a bundle and flew straight into the sky. In midair, their sight finally returned to them, and Shi Qingxuan could see that dozens of meters down below, there were giant flames ablaze, black smoke heavy in the air. The armory was on fire. Afraid that Hua Cheng would give chase, he flapped his fan. Now he was truly fanning the flames. The blaze instantly erupted in size from the wild gust, and embers landed on all the nearby buildings. Now over half of Paradise Manor was ablaze in a field of red. With great difficulty, Lian finally grabbed hold of Shi Qingxuan, who was fanning with all his might. "Lord Windmaster, please stop fanning! The whole place is going to burn down!" Startled, Shi Qingxuan cried. All right, I'm stopping. Let me go, Your Highness. Your grip is too strong." It wasn't until the Windmaster stopped his winds that Lian let go. He looked down, and amidst the red flames, Lian still spotted that crimson silhouette. They were too high in the sky and he couldn't see clearly, but his gut instinct told him that at that moment, Hua Cheng was standing there, watching him. He didn't give chase, nor did he put out the flames. He only stood there, letting the wildfire devour capriciously. Outside Paradise Manor, screams and howls roared from all over Ghost City's streets, and crowds of ghosts ran amok. Lian couldn't breathe, his voice had gone hoarse, and he mumbled to himself, "I only wanted to start a small fire to create a distraction. How did it turn out like this?" It was only a little earlier when Hua Cheng had leaned against the doors of that armory, half jokingly telling him he wanted to give him the entire armory and every weapon inside. But now everything was engulfed in a sea of fire. Although there might be many weapons made of true gold that feared no fire, there were surely also many that could not withstand the flames. After all this burning, many treasures would be reduced to ash. Lian had not expected the flames to grow so violently, devouring all of Paradise Manor. Even if Hua Cheng didn't consider it a home, it was still his residence. Seeing how crushed Lian was, Shi Qingxuan also began to feel bad. I'm really sorry, Your Highness. I didn't think things through. I only wanted to escape faster. This is all my fault. It was definitely only a small fire at first. If Crimson Rain Saltflower comes knocking for payback, you just tell him to come to me. Don't worry, I can pay whatever amount. Money is never an issue." But money was definitely not the issue. Lian closed his eyes, unable to speak. Shi Qingxuan patted his shoulder in consolation, but suddenly felt wetness on his fingertips and smelled a strange, stark stench of blood. He turned his head to look, and his face lost color in alarm. "Your Highness, what happened to your hand?" Lian's right hand, and everything traveling up from it, was covered in blood. His entire right arm was thoroughly dyed red, and the shaking that racked the limb could not be written off as a minor issue. Yet both his hands still firmly gripped the white silk band to keep everyone from being blown apart by wild winds. "What happened to you?" Shi Qingxuan cried. Lian came back to his senses a little and shook his head. It's nothing. Just a small injury. I'll be fine once we're back up there. That white light was you? Shi Qingxuan remembered. Your Highness, you broke those two apart? I'm a swordsman after all, Lian replied. Shi Qingxuan had guessed right. At the moment right before Hua Cheng and Lang Jinchu's blades clashed, Lian darted in. He'd randomly taken a sword from the stacks of weapons on the shelves and made two particular moves between the sword and the scimitar. In the first move, he knocked away Lang Jinchu's greatsword. In the second move, he blocked the scimitar a Ming. The strength of those two moves was not only powerful, but extremely precisely controlled. Even when Lian blocked both blades, the force of the strikes did not rebound onto the attackers. This was because, with Lian sandwiched in the middle, he had used his own sword and arm to absorb both attacks completely. Lang Jinchu's greatsword was manageable, but Hua Cheng's scimitar was a force to be reckoned with. The sword Lian had used was one of Hua Cheng's collection, so naturally it was also a formidable sword. When those two blades crossed, it blasted that blinding white light. With the two moves, the first strike against Lang Jinchu's greatsword caused a crack in Lian's sword, and the second strike against the scimitar Ming shattered it to pieces. All of this was done within a fraction of a second, faster than the eye could see. Shi Qingxuan looked at the tragic state of Lian's right hand and determined that the whole right arm was probably badly mangled. He said, Your Highness, you're so full of vigor. I can't believe you blocked them single-handedly. The flower-crowned martial god, sword in one hand, flower in the other. Shi Qingxuan had only remembered the flower. He had forgotten that Lian ascended because of his sword. Thinking back on how close of a call that was, Shi Qingxuan's heart was still racing. Thank goodness! Thank goodness Your Highness had those moves. Otherwise, who knows how many pieces Lang Jinchu would have been cut into by Hua Cheng. The strange thing was, Lang Jinchu appeared to be unharmed, but he remained in a stunned state, like his soul had left his body. Jinchu, Shi Qingxuan called. Jinchu, are you alright? Wake up! What's with you? Has your sight not returned yet? Riding on a tailwind, the group finally reached the heavenly capital. Dragging and carrying, they rushed past the ascension gates and ran straight for the Palace of Divine Might. Since Lang Ying couldn't enter the palace, Lian settled him in a small side chamber. No one seemed to be on duty, so he shouted within the communication array. Are there any fellow heavenly officials here? Please, everyone, come quickly to the Palace of Divine Might. It's an emergency. We have a wounded official. As he shouted, Shi Qingxuan snapped his fingers and switched back to his white Taoist robes. He waved and released 100,000 merits. It's 2 wounded officials, Lian said hurriedly. Lord Windmaster, don't get so excited. We can ask normally. There's no need to distribute any merits. Everyone will naturally come once they hear us. No, Your Highness, Shi Qingxuan said. You have to know, giving out merit works 100 times faster than asking alone. Soon enough, a voice came from the distance. Who's wounded? When the word who was uttered, the voice was still far away, but by the end of the question, the person had appeared. Fangxin. He entered the hall, looked at Lian, then at Lang Jinchu, his face faltering. I'm fine, but Lord Earthmaster seems to be badly wounded, Lian said. After a moment of silence, Fangxin asked, What happened to your arm? So what if he's injured? Another voice came. There are so many heavenly officials, and who among us has ever returned unscathed after a patrol? The voice was decorous and mellow, but the words were unpleasant. It was, of course, Mu Qing. He crossed into the great hall and also took a look at Lian, then at Lang Jinchu. Yet the face he made was the opposite of Fangxin. He merely arched his brows slightly, looking like he was ready to watch a good show. Seeing how Fangxin moved to check on Shilian's arm, he bent down to check on Ming Yi. He said, "So this is Lord Earthmaster?" During that exchange, a number of heavenly officials poured into the hall one after another. Earthmaster Yi had always been inconspicuous and stayed out of sight, so for many, it was the first time they had ever seen him in person, and they bunched around, staring at him with great interest. The masses were mostly confused, not knowing why they were gathering at the Palace of Divine Might, but having collected the Windmaster's merits, they had to come and check it out. "Thanks, but I'm alright. Leave it and it'll recover on its own," Lian said to Fangxin. Fangxin didn't mince words. "Take care of yourself." Lian uttered another soft thanks, but when he turned around, Lang Qinchu was staring at him with a dazed look. "Your Highness Taihua, what's the matter?" he asked. Fangxin also noticed something off about Lang Qinchu and questioned, "Was His Highness Taihua also injured somewhere?" "I don't think so. Let me see," Lian said and extended his hand, reaching for Lang Qinchu's brow. Yet unexpectedly, with his quick eyes and deft hand, Lang Qinchu seized Lian's wrist. There was still some hesitation on Lang Qinchu's face, as if he had discovered something but still wasn't sure. However, there was already fire burning in his eyes. Lian felt the trembling of rage passing from Lang Qinchu's arm to his. Now all the spectating officials had noticed this unusual situation and started whispering among themselves. Xi Qingxuan and Mu Qing both began to rise, and Fangxin asked, "Your Highness Taihua, what are you doing?" Lang Qinchu finally moved his lips. He only muttered 2 words, but Lian's heart sank all the way to the very bottom. "State Preceptor," Lang Qinchu said through gritted teeth. Lian's pupils contracted slightly. The onlooking heavenly officials muttered, half guessing, half confused. "What State Preceptor? Who's the State Preceptor?" Some were more astute and immediately figured it out. Lang Qinchu was the crown prince of Yang'an, and the State Preceptor of Yang'an during his time was the second of the dual evil masters, the State Preceptor Fangxin. No one knew his origin or his background. Yet in this moment, Lang Qinchu had Lian in his grip and called him State Preceptor. Did this mean that Lian was the evil cultivator who brought ruin to Yang'an? The State Preceptor Fangxin? However, Lian was the crown prince of Shenle. The kingdom of Shenle had fallen at the hands of the kingdom of Yang'an. So why would he become the State Preceptor of Yang'an? His Highness Taihua was renowned in the upper court for his optimism and cheerfulness. He was never calculating, nor did he make things difficult for anyone, and he had never before shown such an expression. Half despair, half rage, half enmity, half hatred. Lang Qinchu had Lian in a death grip, his breathing growing harsher, and finally he said in a strained voice, I killed you with my own 2 hands. Sealed you in that coffin myself. You, State Preceptor. You certainly are remarkable." Heavens. It would appear that something big was about to go down today.